Hey friends, this is Matt with Art with Heart and Healthcare. Today I'm going to be painting a tempera landscape. So we're using Blick paints. They're student quality Blick paints. They're pretty affordable and they're washable, so they're great for working with kids. We use them at the hospital a lot. I'm going to start with a background. It's going to be a sky, and we're going to start by spreading some white paint sort of in the center of the paper and then start blending some blue in it. I just grab big blobs of paint and spread them together. I'm not worried about creating realism today or, you know, painting a photograph or anything like that. And we're just having fun. We're throwing some color on. So we threw the white down first. We're going to put some blue down and then just kind of work it back and forth until it blends down into that white. And we want it to get a little bit darker as it gets up towards the top of the sky, right up to the top of our paper. So you'll see I'm using just more blue and less white. And then we're going to blend some purple in there towards the top, just a little bit, just to make it a little bit darker. I throw clouds in there because they're just fun to paint. I get white paint on like one side of the cloud and then I just start scrubbing it in. Try to make your lines real uneven. Kind of let your hands shake a little bit as you're moving it across the sky. You can even use your fingers to blend stuff in. That works really well for clouds. I like to leave a little highlight, like a little sharp white highlight on the edge. Kind of gives it some extreme lighting. Now we're gonna take a look at maybe doing the land. We want to figure out where the land's gonna be. So I like to keep my background landscape colors really desaturated, which means I just add a lot of white to the paint to kind of reduce the amount of color pigment. It makes it look like it's a little bit farther away. Whereas usually more saturated colors where you see like larger amounts of the pigment, as you see right here, it tends to come forward in space just because of the way that the eye works. So using those little tricks to our advantage, that's kind of one of the tricks I use to make a simple, very gestural landscape look like it has some level of depth. So yeah, we use the little white and little green towards the top, more green towards the middle, and then at the bottom I'll add the complement of the color. So in this case, the complement of green, the opposite of green, is going to be red. So I add a little bit of red to my green paint just to give it some weight, so I can darken it up but still keep it nice and saturated, a nice rich color. I'll throw some water in. We're gonna make like a little bay area here. Just kind of filling it in. That's a turquoise paint from Blick. And I'm going to work out a little bit more of this color, just lay some of the basic stuff down. And then we're going to let it dry a little bit. So now that we've given it a little bit time to dry via movie magic, I'm going to grab this little pointy brush here and we're going to start working on top of this dry area. A little bit more color on top of that mountain area in the back. I'm going to actually throw in some blues because I know cooler colors also tend to recede a little bit, and maybe some of the blue from the sky is reflecting down onto those mountains in the back. Now that we got some blue in there, we're kind of figuring out where our lighting's coming from. I'm going to mix up some green again with the complement, and that's a red. So a little green and red, just adding a tiny bit of red to the green, and it's going to create some really nice darker tones, darker greens. And we're going to work these into our foreground, that land in front of us, that green blobs in front of us here. We're going to work some of that darker green in there, again to create the illusion of maybe like a shadow. So when we painted the clouds, we put the highlight on the left side, and trying to stick with that, I'm going to keep the lighting coming from the left side of the canvas. So I'll start adding in some brighter areas there that should stand out a little bit, and you'll start to see when you start laying these lights and darks down that shapes start to emerge. And really, after this, it's more just an exercise of making those shapes more solid, turning those things into forms. Oh, I mixed up just a little bit of white and brown, um, just to kind of put a little sandy beach effect here. Again, there's more white involved with the brown that's going into the back. So there's a much lighter version of the beach that's going towards that very back side of the beach, and then towards the foreground I'm going to have it a little bit darker, a little bit more saturated, a little bit more pigment. And I'm just kind of taking the brush, it's a little bit damp, and sort of blending some of these colors together. And we'll grab some more turquoise, we'll throw it on the water just for fun because the water's looking pretty flat and we want to start giving it some waves, some dark and light spots. So that's just turquoise and a little bit of white on the edge of the brush. I'm just kind of shaking that brush right along the edge, trying to create the illusion of these waves here. Maybe make a few of them. So again, talking about saturated colors coming forward, so that's colors with more pigment in them come forward. I'm going to use some really bright yellows. I'm going to start pulling these into our foreground. So these mountains that are closer to us are going to have more yellow in them than the ones in the back. Right? It's going to be a little bit brighter, a little bit more saturated, a little bit more colorful. So I'm just adding some yellow in and continuing to find these shapes that are happening sort of on their own. Now I want to add some depth to my water, so again, instead of using black to darken up or create the dark areas, I'm going to use the complement of blue, which is orange. I'm going to mix a little bit of orange in with my blue and try to get a darker version of that. And using that same watercolor brush that I have, I'm just dragging some of that in underneath the waves, underneath the crests of those waves, and down here into the foreground. I'm not being too picky about making the lighting perfect or having the shadow of the mountains. You know, if we were really getting into it, I'm sure we could do that. That's why it's always a lot easier, or better for practice if you're painting from references. But in this case, we're just using our imagination. Again, just bringing some more white in, trying to clean up some of these areas a little bit. Not making them too refined, still keeping it fun. Now, using a really tiny brush, this is one of my favorite brushes. I'm using a really tiny brush, and if you don't have one, you can, if you have some cheap brushes around, you can always modify them with a pair of scissors. Pretty much every artist I know has done that. So, um, using a really tiny brush, just taking some brown, I started painting in where I imagine I might see some palm trees. If I was vacationing on this beach, I would definitely want some shady areas where I could relax and sip my iced tea. So I'm going to paint in some areas where I think I might want palm trees. I'm going to start by just creating the trunks of these palms and spreading them around. Again, these things in the foreground are going to be a little bit bigger than the ones in the background. So if you look down at that beach, those trees are really tiny. But up on this hill where we're sitting, the trees are going to be a lot closer, so they're going to look a lot bigger. And even have maybe two big trees here in the foreground. So these trees are going to be right up close to us. So after I laid down the browns for the tree trunks, with just some yellow paint, I'm going in and starting to just dot in a little texture of highlights that will eventually start to look a little bit like trees. Following the same idea, mixing up some more of that dark green using the red and green, so green with a little bit of red. Made some shadows and started to dot those in between those highlights that I put down, right? So now combined with all these things, you got those dark greens, the shadows, the highlights, the yellows. It'll all start to create this texture that becomes more and more defined, and the brush strokes become larger the closer to the viewer that they become, right? So if you see, I'm making a little bit bolder strokes, heavier strokes when you get towards the bottom left hand side, which would be closer to us. Now while all that's drying, I'm going to go ahead and work a little bit more on these tree trunks, trying to get them look like something, using just brown paint. I'm going to paint the trunks, and then we're also going to figure out where the spines are for the palm fronds. So our leaves, I always like to think of it like an umbrella without a cloth. What would that look like? So we draw those little lines coming out where the palm fronds are going to be. And then after that we can get a little bit of color for our leaves. Now I used purple, and I mixed some green in with it. I'm sorry, I used green and mixed purple in with it because I thought it would add a nice rich tone to those leaves in the foreground, and also darken them up a little bit. So we started with some green, added that green and purple mix. More darker green and purple, green and red. Try experimenting with different colors so you can find what you like. You know, I'm trying to do a little highlight on the left side of the palm trees. Again, that's where our lighting is coming from. So I mixed up just a little bit of white and brown, but then I also added in some orange, which you'll see here in a little bit. I added in some orange because I really wanted those trees in the foreground to pop out, to stand out away from the rest of it, because they're kind of our refuge in this little tropical paradise. And when you're done with all that, you can, again, I use my skinny brush. You can mix a little bit of white and some yellow for highlights on the trees. Don't overdo it, just go in there and add some little streaks. Try to keep in mind, again, where the light's coming from. You don't have to be too strict with yourself, but, just keep it in mind. And from here, it's just adding more light, adding more dark, playing with the balance of shadows. So after all of this stuff, you can take as much time as you want going back and forth between the highlights and the shadows and the highlights and shadows. Find your own style. Keep practicing, keep painting. It's the only way you ever get better at anything, is just keep doing it. And if you like these videos, we are really having a fun time bringing them to you. So please feel free to like the video, subscribe on YouTube to our channel, and we will keep doing our best to bring in you some great content. Thanks a lot, friends. Have a great day.